Good morning to each and every one of you. It's certainly good to be with you. Good to be back. I had a very relaxing week vacationing. I know I was with my sister and it was still relaxing. So she's not up here, so don't tell her I said that. But we had a good time. We got back about 7 o'clock last night, and it's good to be here and good to be with each of you. We're in Jesus the Christ from the Engraving Heavenly Truth series. Lesson 6 that we've been on for about a month. Because of the way they have those cards set up. Not because we're slow. It's never because of that. We're going to cover it the way we need to cover it. If we need to spend a little more time, we'll do that. If we need to go a little faster, we'll do that as well. But in Lesson 6, we've had the Sermon on the Mount. We spent a week on that. We started talking about the 4 individuals from this lesson that Jesus encounters. The first one was Nicodemus. Nicodemus comes to him by night. I said something about a fearful religious leader. Maybe that's how to describe him. I think a discussion, maybe instead of fearful, could have been, but we don't know that for sure. But at least let's call him cautious. A cautious religious leader. He came to Jesus by night so that he wouldn't be discovered by his other Jewish religious leaders. So we'll call him cautious. Might go as far as calling him he was afraid of what would happen if he was seen associating with Jesus. Then we talked about that Jesus told him he must be born again. Nicodemus didn't understand that. Jesus had to explain he wasn't talking about physical birth, being from the bloodline of Abraham. It's not about a physical birth, but it's about what? A spiritual birth. So it's baptism. Baptism puts you in that right relationship with God, not just being born, being a descendant of Abraham like the Jews were. The second person that he encounters, we talked about this lady. She was the Samaritan woman at the well. Jews avoided Samaritans. Jewish men avoided women. Thought they were superior to women. So when Jesus has an encounter with a Samaritan woman, it's big news. What did he tell the Samaritan woman? You must worship in spirit and in truth. The Samaritan woman was sincere in her worship, but she was sincerely wrong. So Nicodemus was a cautious religious leader. The Samaritan woman was, what did we say? She was sincerely wrong. Must worship in spirit and in truth. She had the right intentions, but she wasn't doing things in the right way. She was worshiping in the wrong place, doing the wrong things, and so she didn't have the truth part of it. And Jesus says you had to do both, worship in spirit and in truth. Spirit because God is a spirit. So this brings us to the third person, the message to the rich young ruler, Matthew chapter 19. Matthew chapter 19. Somebody, if you would, read 16 through 20. Don't make me beg. Matthew 19, 16 through 20. That's where we'll start. Okay. Read 20 as well, please. Thank you. Okay. So here's someone that comes up to Jesus, recognizes that Jesus is a teacher, probably denotes that this person thought that he was from God. Jesus responds back to him, "Why are you calling me good? God's the only one that's good." This fellow says, he's searching, isn't he? He's seeking. What do I need to do in order to be in the right relationship with God? What do I need to do in order to be in the right relationship with God the Father? Why callest thou good? Keep the commandments. The young man said to Jesus, "Which ones?" To me, that sounds strange. If I was thinking about which commandments, which ones would you go to first if you were a Jew? The 10? But what have we learned through the Wednesday night study, going through Leviticus and getting ready to go through Deuteronomy in a few weeks? They had added a bunch, hadn't they? 613 different, I think that's right, Mike. Does that ring a bell with you? 613, I think, are the actual number of laws. But what does Jesus revert back to? What does he tell him? Look at the comments. Do you recognize those? Don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, etc. down through there. What are those? Those are the 10 commandments, aren't they? Honor thy father and mother, and then what about the last one? Love thy neighbor as thyself. Well, that's not part of the 10, is it? What's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and mind. And the second is likened to it. What is it? Love thy neighbor as thyself. So those are the commandments that you need to keep. What was the young man's response? I've done that. I've done that. I've kept them from my youth up. What lack I yet? Nicodemus, the cautious ruler or the cautious religious leader, the Samaritan woman, sincerely wrong. We're fixing to find out what Jesus knew about this fellow, right? What lack I? Jesus said unto him, verse 21, if thou wilt be perfect, what does that word perfect mean? Complete, mature. Go and sell all that thou hast and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. What did Jesus know about this guy that we're not told in the first 5 or 6 verses there? Okay. Verse 20 calls him a young man, but we know him as a rich young ruler. We're going to find out that he's rich, isn't he? He's got money. Jesus knew exactly where he was at. He knew where Nicodemus was at. He knew where the Samaritan woman at the well, where she was at in her relationship with God. He knows where this guy is, right? So what is this guy? What would you call him? Covetous? Materialistic? That's where he's at. Go and sell all you have, give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. During the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 6, lay not up for your treasures on earth. What happens to those things? They're going to go away. They're going to rust. They're going to corrupt. But lay for yourself treasures where? In heaven. And that's what he's telling this fellow to do. Put your treasure in heaven and come follow me. And this young guy said, man, that sounds like a good idea. And he went and sold everything he had, and he started following Jesus. It had happened before. He told Andrew, Peter, James, and John, stop doing what you're doing, mending your nets or fishing, and I'll make you fishers of men. Come follow me. And what did they do? That's what they did, right? What about Levi, Matthew? He's sitting there at the tax collector table. Jesus comes to him and he says, come follow me. What did Matthew do? That's what he did. But what did this guy do? He didn't come and follow him, did he? Can you just imagine if you were there, the look on his face? To me, his shoulders went from, boy, look at me. I have done everything that I've needed to do from my youth up. Go ahead. Tell me what I need to do. What else do I lack in order to be complete? And he stands back ready for Jesus to proclaim it. Son, you don't have anything else to do. Just keep doing what you're doing. And when Jesus hit him with those words, what do you think happened? We might say he wanted to crawl out of there, didn't he? Went away sorrowful because he had a lot of stuff, didn't he? Had a great possessions. And he was told he's going to have to give all that away. Now, if you continue through the reading, through the end of the chapter, and we could spend a lot of time on this, but it's not part of this card. We hit it at a different time. The disciples then say, they kind of ask the question, you just told this rich guy that he's not ready to go into the kingdom. Is it possible for someone that's rich to be in the kingdom? That's kind of where the discussion goes next, right? Does Jesus say here that you can't be rich, you can't have money, you can't have possessions and be in the kingdom? That's not what he's saying, is it? In fact, Paul's going to use benefactors, wealthier individuals, in his travel. He goes and associates with them. Yes, he takes care of himself by continuing to build tents, it appears. But there were always benefactors for the Lord's work to be done. It does take some funds. So what's Jesus saying here? We know the verses. It's almost impossible for a rich man to get into heaven. It's just like a camel through the eye of the needle. That's the verses that come after this. But what's Jesus really saying here? It's about the heart, isn't it? It's about the attitude. Seek ye where? The kingdom of God. The first. This guy appears to seek what first? At least we know he's seeking material things, because that's what he was told to give up. That's what he needed to give up. The Jews at the time held the form of the prosperity theology. We've talked about this, I think, on Wednesday night. Maybe Barry did a lesson on it. I guess it was in here, on Job. Remember what they talked about? Job, the reason all this stuff's happened to you is because you've sinned. You've not been doing what you're supposed to do. When you had all this possession, when you had all this, God was blessing you. But just as soon as things start going bad, you've done something wrong, now God's punishing you. That's prosperity theology. This guy thought, I've got a lot of money, I've got a lot of possessions, things are going great for me, I must be doing what God wants me to do, God is blessing me. Okay? What did Jesus tell him? He refuted this belief and turned attention to spiritual matters, things of the heart. You got to give up those things. They're holding you back. You're going to be tied here to all these possessions, And what do you need to be doing? Looking toward heaven, storing up your treasures in heaven. The young man was materialistic and covetous. If he was able to overcome this, he would be, and we talked about this, complete. The Bible there, the King James Version says perfect. In the process, what would he be doing? Benevolence, helping others, being a good example on how to wisely and properly, correctly use the things that God has blessed us with. So we have to be careful about that. But that prosperity theology, take a look at that. Next time you're flipping through the channels, maybe even on the radio. There's not as many radio programs anymore that I hear. Maybe they're on right now. Send us some money and what's going to happen? God's going to bless you. Give to this cause, give to this message. God's going to bless you. That's theology, or prosperity theology. The better you do, the more in favor of God you are. When God starts punishing, boy, you need to do what? Give a little bit more money. All right. Now we're going to go to the fourth person, Zacchaeus. One of my favorite Bible accounts. I didn't say story that time. One of my favorites, because we know the song, don't we? If you're happy and you know it, and wise man, roll the gospel chariot. Zacchaeus is right there, isn't it? Those that we learned from, as the rich young ruler said, from my youth up. We've known him for a long time, and others. But Zacchaeus is a good one. Yeah, he was a wee little man, and what does that mean? He was short, right? But Zacchaeus was short doesn't fit into the song, does it? We have to say. Plus, that's kind of fun to say, wee little man. Maybe that's why we do it for the kids. All right, now we're in Luke chapter 19. That was Matthew 19. Now let's go to Luke 19. Somebody read 1 through 6. So what was the message to Zacchaeus? Today I must abide at your house. Zacchaeus, you come down from there. That's what, and they always, kids, when they say that, they really make it a point, really point with their fingers. Zacchaeus, come down from that tree. Today I'm going to abide at thy house. What was Zacchaeus? Did you notice that? What verse was that? It's verse 2. He was chief among the publicans. That means he was a tax collector. Hired by the Romans. We'll just leave it at that. He worked for the Romans collecting taxes on the Jews to give to the Roman Empire. And whatever he collected more than what the Romans said that he needed to collect, he kept for himself. He was a publican and what? Rich young ruler. We just talked about that. We know how that's going to end. Zacchaeus is rich also. So there we know that Jesus isn't condemning being rich. It's what we do with it and what we think about it. How we place it and prioritize it in our life. But this rich young ruler, we know he went away sorrowful because he wasn't going to change. He liked his stuff too much. But what about Zacchaeus? Jesus, the popularity of Jesus, this is the third line there, had grown. It was evident by the crowd. He was coming into Jericho. Zacchaeus, because he was a wee little man, he was short, knew that he couldn't get the vantage point, be able to see Jesus like he wanted to. When you're a kid and you go to the parade, we're going to have the Christmas parades in a couple weeks, right? One at there, one here. And if you get, or you're at the homecoming parades, if you get behind tall people and you're a kid, can you see everything? So what do some people do when they go to Disney? And the parade's 2 hours from then, but people get out there and they sit on that street, don't they? If you've ever been, you know what I'm talking about. You got to get that vantage point, and you get there early. Well, Zacchaeus undoubtedly hadn't got there early enough, and so when he did arrive, it appears that the streets were lined. And here's a short fella. He's at the back of the crowd. What's he going to be able to see? Not much. So what does he decide to do? This is smart thinking. He's going to climb up in a tree so that when Jesus came walking by, he'd just get a glimpse of him. That appears, that's all he wants. He wants to just see him. But Jesus recognized this, didn't he? He recognized the cautious religious leader, the sincerely wrong woman, the covetous rich young ruler. What does he recognize in Zacchaeus? Curious. He was curious and he was a seeker, wasn't he? He wasn't just somebody out for, just to pass the time. He was looking for the Lord, wasn't he? God knows our heart. Jesus knew their hearts. He knew where they were at. He's going to ask her the right question. He's going to give them the right statement that's going to cause them to show where their heart is. The people were clamoring to hear what Jesus had to say. They were concerned. If we go now to verse 7, what happens? Why are you, Jesus, associating with sinners? The choice of who he associated was causing the crowd to grumble. His teaching with Zacchaeus, what does he say? Jesus' teaching changed Zacchaeus' life. Zacchaeus said, and look there when it talks about, if I have cheated anybody out of anything, if I've cheated out of anybody anything, I will restore to them fourfold. It doesn't say that Zacchaeus ever cheated anybody out of anything. It said, if I have. But he was willing to make good on that. He was going to repent of those wrongdoings. What was Jesus' spiritual lesson to the crowd? They were still caught up in the fact that they were Abraham's children, weren't they? So what was that spiritual lesson? The importance of repenting and obeying God. Matthew 9:12. Jesus answers this question again. Why are you associating with sinners? What did he say numerous occasions? Why he came and associated with sinners? The sick need a what? But the But the healthy don't need a doctor, do they? But I think he knew their hearts. Those that felt like they were healthy, didn't have the right mind, attitude, spirit about them, they weren't willing to change. But those that were able to see, recognize, come to repentance, those that the rest of them called sinful, they were going to be willing to accept Jesus. And so he went to them because he was the one that was going to heal them of the sickness. I must abide at thy house. All right, any questions on any of these four individuals that Jesus encounters? And of course, there are plenty others, but these were the ones that were grouped together. The city that Jesus was first rejected in, his hometown, what was it? Nazareth. And we've talked about this in other lessons different times, so we won't spend a great deal of time on this. But Mark 6 verses 2 and 3 talks about this. Really, the whole section is there 1 through 6. A prophet is not honored, especially in his hometown. That's the more well-known quote, the well-known verse, verse 4. We know that his family at some point was a part of this rejection. John chapter 7 verse 5 and Mark 3:21. Here's the weird thing, and we've talked about this as well. What reputation did Nazareth have? Not a very good one, was it? You would think of any place they would be happy to have somebody. They would be thrilled to have somebody come out of there that was well known or famous or going to go on to do great things, but not Nazareth. A city of a poor reputation itself, it rejected Jesus. Isaiah chapter 53, verse 3, I'll give you that scripture. Isaiah 53:3. Isaiah prophesies that Jesus is going to be rejected. This was early in his ministry. The people of Nazareth desired to kill Jesus. We see this from a similar account in Luke. If you're reading from Mark, it doesn't really say this. But if you turn over to Luke, they wanted to go so far as they wanted to end his life by throwing him down a cliff. We mentioned Isaiah 53:3 that it was prophesied. And then Mark 6:4 that a prophet is not without honor, especially in his hometown. Verse 4, probably the best known verse. All right, the city Jesus was rejected. First rejected was his hometown of Nazareth. Any comments or questions about this? Why Jesus cleansed the temple, number 57. John chapter 2. Sometimes when we think about this, we think about Jesus cleansing the temple as a one-time event. We know that he did this act early in his ministry. That's what we read about in John chapter 2. John chapter 2, about the middle, down about verse 13. But we also know that near the end, in fact, during the last week of his life on earth, the last week before the crucifixion, that he cleansed the temple. So why did he do this? Why did Jesus cleanse the temple? Right. People there had made God's house into a house of merchandise. Now, it's been very good that Barry's went through the Old Testament. You can remember that at certain times of the year, certain acts, certain things that had to be done, sacrifices had to be made at the temple. People would travel for great distance. These sacrifices would include things as we saw that Mary used birds because they were poor, but most of the time lambs or calves, animals that would be hard to transport if you were coming all the way from, let's say, Nazareth, which is in the north, coming down to Jerusalem. So you wouldn't bring your animals with you. It just became more convenient to do what? Get to Jerusalem, go to the temple, buy your animal for sacrifice. Anytime there's going to be exchange of money, anytime there's going to be selling and business, there's a good opportunity for someone to cheat someone else. And maybe I'm not necessarily talking about giving them inferior product or inferior service, but they could exploit the situation. What were these people that were traveling, coming in, wanting to offer sacrifices? What were they to do if they got there and the price that they were going to have to pay was suddenly more than they thought it was going to be? They still had to buy them, didn't they? There was other things that were going on as well. There were different coins, different monies from different areas and different regions, and they had to come in and exchange them because there was the temple tax that had to and needed to be paid. So there are all kinds of ways to exploit. I'm trying to think of, what's that word? Gouge? Maybe we've heard of that. You know, a disaster hits in our time and the price of whatever it is goes through the roof just because of supply and demand. But people had made God's house a house of merchandise. It was the Passover. Animals were brought there for purchase and for sacrifice. Also the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles. Exodus 30, verses 11 through 16 talk about that support for the temple, or we call it the temple tax. We mentioned Jesus did this more than once. This was at the earlier time in His ministry, and then we see the Matthew 21, Mark 11, Luke 19, there at the end of His ministry. You think Jesus was angry? Fashioned some kind of whip, didn't He? In one of these accounts, to drive them out. That's not the meek, weak. You see pictures. We've seen pictures how people depict or what they say about Jesus, that He was meek and not very forceful. You're going to get a whip and drive people out of the temple. That shows strength, doesn't it? And we, of course, know that to be refrained from doing those things oftentimes shows more strength than just to unleash on people. Why Jesus cleansed the temple? Because the people had made it a house of merchandise. Jesus' disciples were accused of violating the Sabbath. Why was this? What act were they doing? Okay. They were taking some kind of grain, weren't they? Might have been plucking grain. Matthew chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. Matthew 12, 1 through 8. The Pharisees had established, according to tradition, 39 categories. I say that and I laugh. 39 categories of action to be forbidden on the Sabbath. What was the rule about the Sabbath? Keep it holy. Then we have this discourse throughout the rest of the books, especially in Deuteronomy, that says you're not supposed to do any work. Don't pick up sticks. Kind of goes back to when they were in the wilderness wandering. The day before the Sabbath, when they went out to pick up the manna, what were they supposed to do? Collect double so that they didn't have to do any work on the Sabbath. And why was this? Where does this principle of not working on the Sabbath, where does it relate back to? The beginning, to creation. 6 days did God create, and on the seventh day He says rested. Basically, He did not work. God wasn't tired. God didn't need to recharge His batteries. He didn't need to relax. But He stopped creating, didn't He? He rested. That's what the Israelites were supposed to do. That day was for the Lord. So what were they to decide what was legal and what wasn't legal? Is that the right word? Permitted. What was to be permitted and what was not to be permitted? Well, the Pharisees come up with 39 categories. According to them, the disciples were harvesting grain. They were harvesting grain. If you read the account there, they went through the field and they were taking whatever grain it was, breaking it apart, husking it, cleaning it up, and eating it. They were hungry. Was eating food on the Sabbath permitted? Yes. Or what they were doing, was it permitted? Jesus says later on in teaching, if your animal falls in a ditch on the Sabbath, are you going to go out and get it out of the ditch, or are you going to let it sit there till the next day? They didn't have much of an answer for that, did they? Of course they were going to go save and rescue their animal. They didn't consider that to be objectionable. Just one more point down there. The Jews' application of the Sabbath law fit their own needs, didn't it? We're going to see that quite often. It does that. The disciples, I put Jesus, should say Jesus' disciples plucking of the grain was allowed under, plucking of the grain was allowed under the law, Deuteronomy 23:15. They were plucking the grain to eat, not for profit. It's kind of the same deal. You remember Ruth went into the field and, Boaz said to leave the edges. It was kind of in that same vein to take care of the poor. So there had to be this intention for the Pharisees to portray Jesus as a lawbreaker or His disciples as ones that are breaking the law, not the Roman law, but the law of Moses, and that way they could accuse Him of wrongdoing. This happens and takes place many times, doesn't it? Times when Jesus prayed, we know this is going to be early in the morning. Anytime He had the opportunity, I'll just mention some of these. He prayed after John's death, prayed at His baptism, prayed before the selection of the apostles, prayed at His transfiguration, prayed in the garden. That may be the most well known. And then we'll get to this card and then we'll be finished finally with 6. Jesus' friends at Bethany, and we'll mention more about these friends as we go through. Of course, that's Mary, Martha, and their brother Lazarus. Mary and Martha, probably the most famous account is when Martha's trying to get supper ready and Mary's not helping her, and she comes in to rebuke her sister, and she gets it turned on her. Mary's chosen the right thing. I won't be here forever. Martha, relax. Quit trying to do everything all at once. And then, of course, we know of Lazarus. What was the most famous thing about Lazarus? He died, and Jesus brought him back from the dead. And we'll spend some more time. There's some other cards that talk about Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. They were friends at Bethany. Bethany, just outside of Jerusalem. He often stayed with them if he was in the area at Jerusalem. Kind of wanted to finish and make sure we got through lesson 6 today, so we hurried there at the end. If you have any questions or comments, you can see me after class or at some point if there's something that we needed to cover, you can sure make that point.